Welcome to one of Earth's most spectacular evolutionary sagas. For over 150 million years, the world's oceans were ruled by creatures of unimaginable power and diversity, giant reptiles that dominated every aquatic ecosystem on the planet. But their reign, as dominant as it was, came to an inevitable end. This is the story of the rise and fall of marine reptiles, a journey that takes us from the depths of prehistoric seas to the moment everything changed forever. We're about to explore how these remarkable creatures conquered the oceans after a catastrophic extinction event, how they adapted and evolved into the most fearsome predators their time had ever known, and ultimately, what led to their mysterious decline and disappearance from Earth's waters. Through cutting-edge paleontological research, advanced scientific analysis, and fossil evidence spanning millions of years, we'll uncover the secrets these ancient animals left behind in stone. So please let us know in the comments where you are watching this history video and what time you are watching it. Are you watching from your home, your classroom, your office during a lunch break? We'd love to know where our viewers are discovering this ancient history. And be absolutely sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos exploring the deepest mysteries of our planet's past. Now let's journey back in time, 252 million years ago, to witness the moment when life on Earth faced its greatest challenge, and when the path toward marine reptile dominance would begin. The cataclysm that changed everything. Before the marine reptiles could rise, there had to be a space for them to fill. The history of these creatures is inextricably linked to one of the most devastating extinction events in Earth's history, the Permian-Triassic extinction, also known as the Great Dying. This catastrophic event, occurring approximately 252 million years ago, wiped out roughly 96% of all marine species and 70% of all vertebrate families on land. It was the most severe extinction crisis life on Earth has ever experienced, and it fundamentally reshaped the entire structure of life in our oceans. To understand why marine reptiles would eventually thrive, we must first understand the world they inherited. During the Permian period, Earth's continents were arranged very differently than they are today. All the major landmasses had coalesced into a single supercontinent called Pangaea. This configuration had dramatic effects on ocean circulation, climate patterns, and the distribution of marine life. The early reptiles that would eventually conquer the seas were not yet marine creatures. They were terrestrial animals, struggling to survive on a Pangaean landscape that was often hostile and unpredictable. The Permian-Triassic extinction event itself remains one of paleontology's most intensely studied mysteries. The causes were complex and multifaceted. Massive volcanic eruptions in the Siberian traps released enormous quantities of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, methane, and other compounds that trapped heat and altered global climate patterns dramatically. These eruptions continued for hundreds of thousands of years, creating what scientists call a volcanic winter effect, where ash and aerosols blocked sunlight and caused temperatures to plummet initially, followed by severe warming as greenhouse gases accumulated. The consequences in the oceans were catastrophic. Rising temperatures caused the water to stratify, with warm layers at the surface and cold, dense water at the bottom. This prevented the mixing of oxygen-rich surface waters with deeper waters, creating vast zones of oxygen depletion, what scientists call anoxia. In these conditions, almost nothing could survive. The loss of oxygen in the oceans was compounded by ocean acidification, as the increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere dissolved into seawater, changing its chemical composition and making it inhospitable for countless creatures that depended on calcium carbonate shells. During this period of upheaval, the ecosystem collapsed from the bottom up. The foundation of the marine food web, the plankton and small organisms that form the base of virtually all ocean ecosystems, was devastated. Without this foundation, larger predators had nothing to eat. The great arthropods that had dominated the oceans for hundreds of millions of years disappeared. The ancient fish-like creatures that had ruled the Paleozoic oceans saw their populations crash. The very structure of marine life was fundamentally dismantled, yet within this catastrophe lay the seeds of opportunity. With most of the ocean's dominant creatures eliminated, vast ecological niches, roles, and spaces within the ecosystem were left empty. These weren't just minor positions in the food web, they were the most important roles. The top predator positions, the dominant plant eaters, the specialized filter feeders, all of these ecological niches were suddenly vacant. For any creature that could adapt to these conditions, the potential for success was enormous. It is in this context that we must understand the significance of what comes next in our story. The marine reptiles didn't invent themselves overnight. They descended from terrestrial reptiles that existed before the extinction. But they were perhaps uniquely positioned to take advantage of the opportunities that the post-Permian Triassic world presented. These reptiles possessed flexible skeletons, adaptable physiology, and a versatility that would prove invaluable in the Triassic period's recovering oceans. The early Triassic, a world in recovery. The Triassic period began approximately 252 million years ago, in the immediate aftermath of the Great Dying. The world that greeted the survivors was harsh and alien even by ancient standards. The oceans were still recovering from the anoxic crisis. Oxygen levels remained dangerously low in many regions. The climate was erratic, swinging from extreme heat to sudden cold snaps as volcanic activity continued and the atmosphere struggled to reach a new equilibrium. Life on land was sparse and difficult. In these harsh conditions, the recovery was slow and uneven, yet life is remarkably persistent. Over millions of years, the oxygen levels in the oceans gradually increased. The plankton and simple organisms began to repopulate the waters. Small fish and marine creatures that had survived the extinction in protected refuges started to diversify and multiply. With each passing million years, the oceans became more hospitable, and the potential for complex ecosystems to rebuild increased. It was during this early recovery period that something extraordinary began to happen. Several lineages of terrestrial reptiles, different groups that had evolved separately, began independently returning to the sea. This was not a coordinated event. It was a convergent evolutionary response to the same environmental pressure and opportunity. When an ecological niche is vacant and a creature possesses the traits necessary to exploit it, natural selection favors the exploration of that environment. The reptiles that ventured into the sea did so because their physiology allowed it and because the rewards were immense. These weren't the first terrestrial creatures to return to the water. Amphibians had done so long before, and there were already some fish in the oceans. But reptiles brought something special to the marine environment. They brought the physiology of land animals, efficient lungs for breathing air, the ability to regulate body temperature, sophisticated nervous systems, and the predatory prowess that had made them successful on land. These traits would prove transformative in the marine realm. The earliest of these returning reptiles were relatively modest creatures compared to what would eventually evolve. Among the first were the Ichthyosaurs. The early Ichthyosaurs of the Triassic period were smaller than their later descendants, typically ranging from a few feet to perhaps 20 feet in length. These pioneering creatures bore the hallmarks of being newly adapted to marine life. Their bodies were still somewhat awkward by comparison to later forms, their fins not quite as efficiently designed, their swimming techniques perhaps less refined. Yet they were marine reptiles, and they had successfully made the transition to ocean life. The skeleton of these early Ichthyosaurs reveals much about how they accomplished this transition. Unlike land reptiles, which have limbs designed for walking and running on solid ground, Ichthyosaurs developed flippers, limbs that were flattened and extended, with bones that were closely packed together to create rigid paddle-like structures. The shoulder joints changed to accommodate the new function. The backbone became more flexible in specific regions, allowing for the undulating motions necessary for efficient swimming. These changes didn't happen instantly. They accumulated gradually over generations as natural selection favored individuals whose physical traits were best suited to life in the sea. Alongside the Ichthyosaurs, other reptile lineages were making their own ventures into the water. The Mosasaurs appeared during the early Triassic, representing another independent lineage of marine adaptation. These creatures were generally smaller than the Ichthyosaurs, often ranging from 3 to 10 feet in length, though some larger forms would eventually evolve. The Mosasaurs had a different body plan from the Ichthyosaurs. They retained relatively long necks and possessed limbs that, while modified for swimming, were not quite as transformed as those of Ichthyosaurs. They appear to have been more versatile swimmers, capable of both undulating like fish and using their flippers for propulsion in different ways. The Placodonts were yet another lineage of marine reptiles, though they took a different evolutionary path than the Ichthyosaurs and Nothosaurs. Rather than becoming apex predators hunting fish and other large prey, the Placodonts specialized in crushing hard-shelled invertebrates. Their jaws became progressively more powerful, their teeth became flattened and robust, designed for crushing rather than gripping. Some paleontologists have compared them to modern sea turtles in their ecological role, though they were not closely related. These creatures filled a specific niche in the recovering Triassic seas, exploiting food sources that other marine reptiles did not. What's remarkable about all of these early marine reptile lineages is how rapidly they diversified and adapted. The fossil record shows that within just a few million years of returning to the sea, a blink of an eye in geological time, these reptiles had already developed distinctive characteristics, body plans, and ecological roles. This rapid diversification speaks to the power of natural selection working on populations in vacant ecological niches. When there's abundant food and space, and when an organism has the basic physiological tools to exploit new environments, evolution can produce dramatic changes relatively quickly. The mechanics of marine adaptation, understanding how terrestrial reptiles became marine animals, is fundamental to appreciating the achievement of marine reptile evolution. The process wasn't magical, it didn't happen overnight. Instead, it was a gradual process of physical change, driven by natural selection, accumulating over millions of years. Yet in evolutionary terms, this process was remarkably rapid. The transformation from a land-dwelling reptile to a fully aquatic marine animal required changes to virtually every system in the body. The most obvious changes were skeletal and structural. The limbs, which had evolved originally for walking and running, had to be fundamentally redesigned. The process didn't involve the limbs shrinking away, which happened in some marine animals like snakes. Instead, marine reptiles lengthened and flattened their limbs, transforming them into flippers. The bones of the fingers and toes became elongated and in some cases multiplied, a process called hyperphalangy. In some marine reptiles, the number of bones in a single finger could increase from the typical reptilian count of 3 or 4 to 8, 10, or even more. These extra bones allowed for greater surface area and more flexible fins. The spine underwent significant modifications as well. In terrestrial reptiles, the spine is somewhat rigid, designed to transfer the force of limb movement to the rest of the body. In marine reptiles, particularly the Ichthyosaurs, the spine became more flexible in certain regions, allowing for the side-to-side undulating motions that are so effective for swimming. The vertebrae themselves changed shape, becoming more disc-like and less interlocking, permitting greater rotational movement. The tail, which had served various purposes in terrestrial reptiles, became a powerful swimming organ, often developing a vertical fluke that could move up and down to propel the body through water. The development of a tail fluke is particularly interesting because it represents convergent evolution with fish. Fish use vertical tail flukes, moving them side to side to achieve forward propulsion. For millions of years, paleontologists assumed that marine reptiles like the Mosasaurs had eel-like tails, undulating in a vertical plane. However, recent scientific analysis, including sophisticated CT scanning and examination of the flexibility patterns in fossilized vertebrae, has revealed that Mosasaurs actually developed shark-like tail flukes with a similar vertical orientation to fish. This is a remarkable example of how different creatures, arriving at the same solution through separate evolutionary pathways, can develop nearly identical structures. Beyond the skeleton, the physiology of marine reptiles had to change to cope with the demanding marine environment. One of the fundamental challenges of becoming a marine animal is respiration. Land animals breathe air through lungs, fish extract dissolved oxygen from water through gills. The early marine reptiles inherited the lungs of their terrestrial ancestors and never developed gills. This meant they had to continue surfacing to breathe air throughout their lives. This limitation actually persists in modern marine reptiles like sea turtles and sea snakes. The respiratory systems of marine reptiles became increasingly efficient at extracting and storing oxygen. Their lungs became larger and more effective at oxygen absorption. Their blood became capable of carrying higher concentrations of oxygen. Some marine reptiles likely developed flexible rib cages that could collapse during deep dives, preventing pressure-related damage to the lungs. The spleen, an organ that stores oxygen-rich blood in some animals, may have enlarged in some marine reptiles, allowing them to make longer underwater forays. These adaptations, accumulated over millions of years, made marine reptiles remarkably effective divers and swimmers, capable of pursuing prey in deep waters and surviving extended periods underwater. The sensory systems also evolved to suit marine life. The eyes, for instance, had to adapt to the marine environment. Terrestrial reptiles have eyes designed to focus in air. The cornea, the clear outer part of the eye, does much of the focusing work. Water, where light behaves differently, these eyes would be severely myopic. Marine reptiles developed different eye structures. Some, like the Ichthyosaurs, developed enormous eyes, some of the largest eyes relative to body size of any animal that has ever lived. These weren't just for show, they were adaptations for seeing in the dim light of deeper waters. The lenses became more spherical, better suited to focusing in aquatic environments. The eyes developed specialized structures to protect them during diving. The sense of hearing also transformed. In water, sound travels much faster and farther than in air, and low-frequency vibrations are particularly important. Marine reptiles likely developed enhanced hearing, possibly through modifications to their inner ear structures. Some paleontologists have proposed that certain marine reptiles may have been capable of echolocation, or at least of detecting vibrations from prey movements in ways we're only beginning to understand. The skin and body covering changed as well. Terrestrial reptiles typically have dry, scaly skin, designed to prevent water loss on land. Marine reptiles needed skin that could withstand constant immersion in salt water while remaining flexible enough to allow for the movements necessary for swimming. The skin likely became smoother, reducing drag as the animals moved through water. Some marine reptiles may have developed specialized skin structures to help with thermoregulation, which brings us to one of the most interesting adaptations marine reptiles evolved. The warm-blooded revolution. For decades, paleontologists assumed that all reptiles, including marine reptiles, were cold-blooded, or more accurately, ectothermic, meaning they derived most of their body heat from external sources and had relatively slow metabolic rates. This assumption was based on the characteristics of modern reptiles like crocodiles, lizards, and snakes, which are indeed ectothermic. However, advances in paleontological science, particularly the analysis of fossilized bone structure, isotopic ratios in bones, and the study of growth patterns in marine reptile fossils, have suggested that this assumption was wrong. The evidence now indicates that many marine reptiles were at least partially endothermic, warm-blooded, with metabolic rates high enough to maintain elevated body temperatures independent of environmental conditions. This is significant because warm-bloodedness brings substantial advantages in an aquatic environment. A warm-blooded animal can maintain its muscles at peak efficiency regardless of the temperature of the surrounding water. It can move faster and more powerfully than a cold-blooded animal in the same conditions. It can hunt effectively in cold waters where a cold-blooded predator would become sluggish and ineffective. The evidence for endothermy in marine reptiles comes from several sources. First, there's the bone histology, the microscopic structure of fossilized bones. Bones of warm-blooded animals typically show patterns of growth that differ from those of cold-blooded animals. Warm-blooded animals tend to grow more rapidly and continuously, producing characteristic patterns in the bone structure that paleontologists can identify in cross-sections of fossilized bones. Many marine reptile fossils show these patterns. Second, there's the isotopic evidence. Different isotopes of oxygen and carbon are incorporated into bones and teeth at different rates depending on the metabolic rate of the animal. By analyzing the ratios of these isotopes in fossilized marine reptile remains, paleontologists can make inferences about the metabolic rates of these ancient creatures. Studies of Ichthyosaurs, Plesiosaurs, and Mosasaurs using this technique have suggested metabolic rates consistent with at least partial endothermy. Third, there's the ecological argument. Some marine reptiles grew to immense sizes and occupied roles as apex predators, hunting large, fast-moving prey over vast distances. This kind of lifestyle requires sustained muscular performance and efficient metabolism. While not conclusive on its own, this observation supports the idea that these creatures were warm-blooded. The evolutionary advantage of warm-bloodedness in the marine environment would have been substantial. As climate fluctuated during the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods, the oceans experienced temperature variations. A warm-blooded marine reptile would have been far more effective in these changing conditions than a cold-blooded one. Furthermore, warm-bloodedness enabled longer, faster hunting episodes and the exploitation of deeper, colder waters where many fish and cephalopods lived. However, endothermy carries a cost. It requires more food. A warm-blooded animal must eat more frequently than a cold-blooded animal of the same size to maintain its metabolism. This means that in marine reptiles, endothermy would only have evolved if the benefits, increased hunting efficiency, speed, and range, outweighed this cost. The fact that evidence suggests many marine reptiles were indeed warm-blooded implies that the marine environment was rich enough to support the energy requirements of these creatures. The Shonisaurus, king of the early marine reptiles by the Triassic period, around 11 million years into the marine reptile era, one creature epitomized the success of these animals' marine adaptation, the Shonisaurus. This ichthyosaur was an enormous creature by the standards of its time, reaching lengths of up to 50 feet or more, making it one of the largest animals that had ever existed up to that point in Earth's history. The Shonisaurus represented the culmination of millions of years of evolution, refinement, and successful adaptation to marine life. The first Shonisaurus fossils were discovered in the late 20th century in the Triassic rocks of Nevada and other western regions. When paleontologists examined these remains, they were struck by the sheer size and sophistication of the animal. The Shonisaurus possessed a streamlined body that would have made it extraordinarily efficient in the water. Its flippers, though still bearing the fundamental tetrapod structure, 5 fingers and 5 toes, had become powerful appendages for steering and maneuvering. The body was long and relatively slender, culminating in a powerful tail with a fluke that could be rotated and controlled with precision. The head of Shonisaurus reveals much about its hunting strategies. The eyes were enormous, positioned on the sides of the head, providing excellent peripheral vision useful for tracking moving prey. The snout was relatively short and broad, with powerful jaws lined with conical teeth designed for gripping slippery fish and other marine creatures. The position of the nostrils on top of the head meant that the animal could breathe while submerged, remaining in the water hunting while keeping just the very top of its head exposed. The discovery of Shonisaurus fossils has provided paleontologists with insights into the lifestyle of these ancient creatures. In one notable fossil site in Nevada, known as the Shonisaurus popularis bonebed, paleontologists discovered multiple Shonisaurus individuals of varying ages fossilized together. This discovery suggested that these creatures may have congregated in groups, perhaps for breeding purposes or to cooperatively hunt large prey. This is a fascinating suggestion, implying that Shonisaurus possessed more complex social behavior than most modern reptiles, approaching the complexity we see in marine mammals and sharks. The growth patterns of Shonisaurus fossils have provided additional insights into their lives. By examining the growth rings in cross-sections of bones, similar to tree rings, paleontologists can determine the age at which individual Shonisaurus individuals died. The presence of young, medium-sized, and large individuals in fossil deposits suggests that Shonisaurus reproduced regularly and that populations were self-sustaining. This indicates successful breeding populations, which likely meant seasonal migrations or gathering for reproduction, behaviors we can infer from the paleontological evidence even without direct fossil evidence of these behaviors. What hunting strategies might Shonisaurus have employed? The size and power of these creatures suggest they were apex predators, animals at the top of the food chain. The exact prey is difficult to determine from fossils alone, but during the Triassic, the oceans were full of fish, squid, and smaller marine reptiles. A Shonisaurus with its size and speed could have hunted any of these with relative ease. Cooperative hunting by groups of Shonisaurus might have allowed them to take even larger prey or to corner and exhaust it before delivering the killing bite. The success of Shonisaurus speaks to the broader success of Ichthyosaurs during this period. The Triassic seas had become stable enough, warm enough, and rich enough to support massive marine reptiles. The evolutionary pathway from small, awkward early marine reptiles to the sophisticated, efficient hunters like Shonisaurus unfolded across roughly 20 to 30 million years. In evolutionary terms, this is rapid change. Yet it reflects the power of natural selection operating on populations with traits that were increasingly well-suited to marine life. Diversification and specialization. As the Triassic period progressed and the oceans continued to stabilize, marine reptile diversity exploded. The early Ichthyosaurs and Nothosaurs that had pioneered marine life in the Triassic gave rise to numerous specialized descendants, each adapted to specific ecological roles and environmental niches. This diversification is a classic pattern in evolutionary history. When new environments or opportunities open up, organisms with the basic traits suitable for exploiting those opportunities evolve rapidly, producing high diversity as different lineages specialize into different roles. The Ichthyosaurs continued to dominate throughout the Triassic. Beyond the massive Shonisaurus, there were smaller, more nimble Ichthyosaurs that specialized in hunting fish in shallow waters. Some Ichthyosaur lineages developed longer necks, allowing them to hunt in a different manner than their more streamlined cousins. Others retained the short-necked, highly streamlined body plan that was most efficient for open water hunting. The diversity of Ichthyosaur sizes ranged from creatures perhaps no more than 3 feet long to monsters like Shonisaurus. The Nothosaurs diversified as well, producing numerous species with varying sizes and specializations. Some Nothosaurs became more fish-like, developing increasingly efficient swimming apparatus. Others remained somewhat more lizard-like in their body proportions, perhaps spending time both in water and on land, in a lifestyle reminiscent of modern seagoing lizards and crocodiles. The Nothosaurs produced their own giants, creatures like Nothosaurus itself, which could reach 30 feet or more in length. But the most significant diversification during the Middle and later Triassic came with the rise of the Plesiosaurs. The Plesiosaurs represented a new body plan, distinct from the streamlined, fish-like forms of the Ichthyosaurs. The first plesiosaurs appeared in the fossil record around 240 million years ago, and their innovation was revolutionary. They developed long necks. While most Triassic marine reptiles had necks proportional to their body size, some plesiosaurs evolved necks that were extraordinarily long, sometimes equal to or exceeding the length of the rest of their body. The skeletal structure of the plesiosaur neck was fascinating. The vertebrae were modified to allow for flexibility, yet the neck was supported by strong ligaments and muscles. The head, typically small in proportion to the body, positioned at the end of this long neck, was equipped with teeth designed for gripping prey. The body was stout, supported by 4 large flippers that appear to have been used in a rowing motion, propelling the creature through water in a manner that was quite different from the tail-powered locomotion of ichthyosaurs. The evolutionary advantages of a long neck are interesting to consider. For a creature like a plesiosaur, the long neck allowed hunting in shallow waters while the body remained in deeper water, safer from some threats. The extended neck could probe into crevices and under rocks where smaller prey might hide. The head, being small and light, could move quickly and precisely to snatch prey. Additionally, the position of the eyes, set on the sides of the head, could track prey both above and to the side as the long neck moved. Alongside the major groups of ichthyosaurs, nothosaurs, and plesiosaurs, other marine reptile lineages developed. The placodont's, those specialized shell crushers we mentioned earlier, diversified into numerous forms. Some became larger, developing massive crushing jaws and flat teeth like grinding stones. Their bodies became somewhat turtle-like, possibly with bony armor on their backs for protection. The placodonts appear to have been relatively specialized animals, never achieving the diversity or abundance of the ichthyosaurs or plesiosaurs, but occupying specific ecological roles in Triassic ecosystems. By the end of the Triassic period, around 200 million years ago, marine reptiles had thoroughly conquered the oceans. They inhabited waters from the equator to the polar regions. They occupied every major ecological role available to large marine predators. They had evolved to sizes that rivaled the largest animals the oceans had ever seen. The marine realm was unquestionably their domain. The Triassic-Jurassic boundary, extinction and renewal, the transition from the Triassic to the Jurassic period, occurring roughly 200 million years ago, involved another extinction event, far less severe than the Permian-Triassic catastrophe, but still significant. Causes are debated but likely involved a combination of volcanic activity, changes in ocean chemistry, and climate fluctuations. Several groups of marine reptiles that had dominated the Triassic, notably the nothosaurs and placodonts, went extinct or declined severely during this transition. However, the extinction at the Triassic-Jurassic boundary did not devastate marine reptiles as a whole. Indeed, it appears to have been a catalyst for further diversification among the surviving groups. With the nothosaurs largely gone, the remaining ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs diversified to fill their ecological roles. New plesiosaur lineages emerged, some of which would go on to incredible size and diversity in the Jurassic. New ichthyosaur forms evolved, with some becoming even more specialized and efficient hunters. The Jurassic period, which lasted from approximately 200 to 145 million years ago, was the golden age of marine reptiles. The climate was warm and stable, the oceans were productive, and marine reptile diversity reached its peak. This is the period that most captures the public imagination regarding marine reptiles, and for good reason. It was the time when some of the most iconic and extraordinary creatures ever to swim Earth's oceans reached their greatest diversity and abundance. The Jurassic, an ocean of giants. The Jurassic period represents perhaps the most spectacular era of marine reptile dominance. The climate was warm, far warmer than today, and sea levels were high, flooding vast areas of the continents. In these warm, shallow seas and in the deeper ocean basins, marine reptiles thrived. The diversity of forms, sizes, and specializations reached levels unmatched in any other period. The ichthyosaurs of the Jurassic were remarkably diverse. They ranged in size from creatures no more than a few feet long to giants approaching 60 feet in length. Forms like the Elasmosaurus, famous for possessing some of the largest eyes relative to body size of any animal ever to exist, specialized in hunting in dim light, possibly in deeper waters. The Ichthyosaurus itself, a more typical form, was a sleek, efficient hunter of fish and squid. The variety of ichthyosaur forms suggests that different species occupied different ecological niches, some hunting in shallow waters, others in the open ocean, some in coastal environments, others in the deep sea. What's particularly fascinating about Jurassic ichthyosaurs is the preservation of soft tissue details in some fossils. In certain locations, such as the Posidonia shale deposits of Germany, ichthyosaur fossils have been preserved with remarkable detail, including impressions of skin and, in some cases, the outline of the tail fluke. These fossils have confirmed that ichthyosaurs possessed dorsal fins, fins running along the back, and that their tail flukes were indeed vertically oriented, much like those of sharks or fish. They've also revealed that the body surface was smooth, with no scales visible in these specimens, suggesting a skin texture more similar to modern dolphins than to lizards. Even more remarkably, some Jurassic ichthyosaur fossils have been found with babies inside them, unborn young at various stages of development. This is extraordinary evidence of reproductive strategy. It confirms what paleontologists had long suspected. Ichthyosaurs were viviparous, meaning they gave birth to live young rather than laying eggs. The females carried developing embryos inside their bodies, providing nourishment and protection until the young were ready to be born. This reproductive strategy, which requires significant energy investment from the mother, suggests sophisticated internal physiology and strong maternal investment in offspring survival. The Plesiosaurs of the Jurassic were equally diverse and spectacular. The early Jurassic saw the continued evolution of long-necked forms, and these animals became increasingly specialized. Some Plesiosaurs developed necks that were extraordinarily long. The remarkable Elasmosaurus, which we'll discuss in detail, had a neck comprising more than half of its entire body length. These long-necked Plesiosaurs, called Plesiosaurids, occupied ecological niches that were unique to marine reptiles. No other marine predator before or after has achieved the same body plan. Alongside the long-necked forms, another plesiosaur lineage evolved, the Pliosaurs. These creatures took a different evolutionary path. Rather than developing long necks, Pliosaurs evolved larger heads and shorter, more robust necks. The body remained compact, but the limbs became more powerful. The head housed massive jaws filled with large, sharp teeth. Pliosaurs became increasingly specialized as powerful, fast-swimming apex predators, hunters of large marine reptiles and fish. The largest pliosaurs of the Jurassic were formidable predators. Creatures like Leopleurodon reached lengths of 25 to 35 feet or more and possessed bite forces that likely exceeded those of any modern animal. The skull was heavily reinforced, capable of withstanding the recoil forces generated by capturing large, struggling prey. The eyes were positioned on the sides of the head, providing good binocular vision forward and excellent peripheral vision, ideal for hunting active prey in three-dimensional marine environments. The question of what pliosaurs hunted is central to understanding their ecological role. With bodies up to 35 feet long, pliosaurs were large enough to hunt virtually anything in the Jurassic seas. Their prey likely included fish, squid, smaller marine reptiles, and quite possibly ichthyosaurs. The idea of apex predators preying on other marine reptiles isn't unusual. Even today, large sharks sometimes prey on smaller marine reptiles. The Jurassic ecosystem was likely complex, with multiple levels of predation and competition among marine reptiles. Beyond the ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, the Jurassic seas hosted other marine reptiles. The Mosasaurs, which would become dominant predators in the Cretaceous, had not yet evolved, but other lineages of marine reptiles existed. Some fossil sites have yielded remains of creatures whose classification and relationships to other marine reptiles remain subjects of ongoing paleontological research. The seas of the Jurassic were truly an arena of evolutionary experimentation and competition. Hunting strategies and prey relationships. The marine reptiles of the Jurassic employed diverse hunting strategies, reflecting their different anatomies and ecological roles. Understanding these strategies requires us to integrate evidence from paleontology, comparative anatomy, and our knowledge of how modern predators hunt. The ichthyosaurs, being fish-like in their body form and powered primarily by their tails, likely hunted with strategies similar to modern fast-swimming predators like tuna or dolphins. They probably used speed and agility to pursue and overtake prey. Their large eyes were useful for hunting in the relatively dim light of deeper waters. Many ichthyosaurs had relatively small teeth, suggesting they fed on fish and squid of moderate size, catching and swallowing them whole. Some ichthyosaurs, particularly the larger forms, may have used burst speed and powerful tails to stun or injure prey before consumption. The long-necked plesiosaurs likely hunted differently. With their relatively inflexible bodies and powered by flippers rather than tails, they were probably slower and more deliberate hunters. The long neck was a remarkable adaptation that allowed these creatures to hunt in specific ways. They likely used the neck for quick striking motions, snapping up prey much as modern crocodiles do when they strike with their heads. The position of the eyes on the sides of the head suggests these creatures hunted by moving through schools of fish and striking at individuals as they encountered them. In shallow water, the long neck may have allowed them to hunt while their body remained in slightly deeper, safer water. The Pliosaurs, with their large heads and powerful jaws, likely hunted much more aggressively. They probably used speed, generated by their powerful flippers and flexible bodies, to close distances rapidly. Once close to prey, they likely relied on powerful biting and the sheer strength of their jaws to capture and subdue large prey. The position of the eyes, more forward-facing than in Plesiosaurids, suggests better binocular vision and potential prey pursuit hunting. Pliosaurs may have been capable of hunting large fish, other marine reptiles, or even utilizing strategies like modern orcas, where group hunting might have allowed them to take down prey larger than any individual. What was the impact of these predators on prey populations? The fossil record provides some clues. Ammonites, cephalopods related to modern nautiluses, were extremely abundant in Jurassic oceans. Fossils of ammonites are found in virtually every Jurassic marine deposit. Yet many ammonites possessed shells with surface injuries consistent with being struck by marine reptile teeth or possibly from escaping predator attacks. This suggests that predation pressure was significant, but that prey populations were generally robust enough to sustain predation while maintaining their populations. Fish populations in the Jurassic oceans were diverse and abundant. The fossil record shows numerous fish species ranging from small minnow-like creatures to large predatory fish. Sharks were also present, serving as both competitors with and potential prey for marine reptiles. The competitive and predator-prey relationships in Jurassic marine ecosystems were complex, with multiple species occupying overlapping roles. Jurassic marine ecosystems, structure and function. To truly understand the rise and success of marine reptiles, we must consider them not in isolation, but as parts of complex ecosystems. A marine ecosystem encompasses not just the large predators, but also the vast array of organisms that form the foundation and structure of the system. The base of Jurassic marine food webs consisted of plankton, microscopic organisms like algae, protists, and small crustaceans. These organisms, driven by energy from the sun, produced the organic compounds that powered the entire ecosystem. The plankton was grazed upon by small fish, larval forms of larger animals, and filter-feeding organisms. The small fish and invertebrates fed larger fish, squid, and smaller marine reptiles. At the top of the food chain were the apex predators, the large Plesiosaurs, Ichthyosaurs, and Pliosaurs. The efficiency of energy transfer in this system is important to consider. A general rule in ecology is that only about 10% of the energy available at one level of the food chain is available to the next level. This means that to support a large population of apex predators, there must be enormous biomass at the lower levels of the food chain. The abundance of marine reptiles in the Jurassic implies that the oceans were extraordinarily productive, capable of supporting massive populations of small organisms and fish to fuel the huge populations of large marine reptiles at the top of the food web. Interestingly, different marine reptiles might have occupied different positions in this food web. Smaller ichthyosaurs, being small enough to hunt fish suitable for their consumption, would have competed with fish eating sharks and other fish predators. Larger ichthyosaurs and pliosaurs, being massive enough to hunt large fish and other marine reptiles, occupied a different trophic level. Plesiosaurs, with their specialized long necks and hunting strategies, occupied ecological space that no other creatures exploited. This differentiation of roles allowed multiple marine reptile species to coexist in the same ecosystem without excessive direct competition. Reproduction and breeding were crucial aspects of Jurassic marine ecosystems. The ichthyosaurs, as we mentioned, were live bearers, giving birth to fully formed young. Plesiosaurs likely also reproduced this way, though direct fossil evidence is less abundant. The need to breed likely drove seasonal migrations and congregations, similar to what we see in modern marine mammals. Such gatherings would have made breeding populations vulnerable to predation, but they were apparently necessary for successful reproduction. The Middle Jurassic, refinement and specialization. As the Jurassic progressed from its earliest phase into the Middle Jurassic, roughly 175 to 161 million years ago, marine reptiles became increasingly refined and specialized. The diversity of forms reached its height. In many paleontological deposits from the Middle Jurassic, marine reptile fossils are abundant and diverse. Paleontologists working in deposits from this time often find remains of ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, pliosaurs, and other marine reptiles in close association, indicating that numerous species coexisted and overlapped in their ranges. The Torsian stage, within the early to Middle Jurassic boundary, was a time of oceanic reorganization. Changes in ocean circulation patterns and chemistry led to episodes of oxygen depletion in certain parts of the oceans, events somewhat reminiscent of, but far less severe than the Permian-Triassic crisis. These episodes may have reduced the abundance of certain marine reptiles in affected regions, but the overall impact on marine reptile diversity appears to have been limited. The dominance of marine reptiles in global oceans continued unabated. By the Middle Jurassic, different regions of the world had their characteristic marine reptile faunas. The shallow seas that covered much of Europe in the Middle Jurassic, such as the epicontinental seas, hosted their own communities of marine reptiles. The deep ocean basins supported different communities. Polar and equatorial regions likely had different assemblages. This regional variation, combined with global diversity, indicates that marine reptiles had truly conquered the world's oceans. The Late Jurassic, dominance at its peak. The Late Jurassic, 161 to 145 million years ago, represents the absolute peak of marine reptile dominance. The climate was warm, sea levels were high, and the oceans were teeming with life. Marine reptiles had reached extraordinary sizes, diversified into numerous specialized forms, and occupied virtually every major ecological role available in marine ecosystems. The largest ichthyosaurs of all time appeared during this period. Creatures like the Shonisaurus, an ichthyosaur that some paleontologists believe may have approached or exceeded 60 feet in length, dominated the open oceans. These were not just large creatures, they were massive, powerful predators. The fact that such enormous creatures not only existed but maintained populations indicates the extraordinary productivity of late Jurassic oceans. The largest Plesiosaurs also appeared during the late Jurassic. Animals like Elasmosaurus epitomized the remarkable specialization some Plesiosaurs achieved. Elasmosaurus, which we'll examine in detail, represented a remarkable evolutionary experiment, a marine reptile that had taken the long neck strategy to its absolute extreme, developing a neck comprising more than half of its body length. This creature inhabited the oceans of the late Jurassic and into the Cretaceous, succeeding magnificently in its specialized ecological niche. The Pliosaurs of the late Jurassic reached the sizes that would define them as the apex predators of the Jurassic oceans. Creatures like Plesiosaurus itself could reach 35 feet or more and possessed the massive heads, powerful jaws, and muscular bodies that made them formidable hunters. These were not creatures that could move quickly in a sprint like modern dolphins, but they were powerful, intelligent, and capable of delivering devastating predatory strikes. Elasmosaurus, the ultimate long-necked specialist, the Elasmosaurus deserves special attention because it represents one of the most remarkable examples of evolutionary specialization in any animal, marine, or terrestrial. This creature, which lived during the late Jurassic and persisted into the early Cretaceous, achieved a body plan so extreme that it seems almost impossible that it could have functioned effectively in the marine environment. Elasmosaurus reached lengths of up to 45 to 50 feet, but what makes it truly remarkable is how that length was distributed. Approximately 26 feet of the animal's total length was neck. The body itself, while large, was relatively compact, perhaps only 15 to 20 feet long. The tail, relatively short compared to many marine reptiles, added another 8 to 10 feet. This arrangement created an animal that was, in essence, a head and a small body attached to an extraordinarily long neck. The anatomical requirements for supporting such a neck must have been extraordinary. The Elasmosaurus possessed 71 or more vertebrae in its neck alone, far more than any other marine reptile, and more than many snakes. These vertebrae were relatively simple in structure, articulating with each other in a manner that allowed flexibility while remaining firmly connected. The spinal cord running through the vertebral column had to navigate this long passage, while nerves branching off along the entire length controlled the neck muscles. The musculature supporting the Elasmosaurus neck must have been extensive and powerful, yet the neck appears to have been relatively slender, not a massive, muscular column but a somewhat gracile structure. This suggests that the Elasmosaurus evolved mechanisms to minimize the weight of the neck while maintaining its functional strength. The bones may have been relatively thin-walled, reducing weight while maintaining rigidity. The muscles, while powerful, were likely arranged efficiently. The question of how Elasmosaurus actually hunted has fascinated paleontologists for decades. The long neck suggests it hunted by moving through schools of fish or near the seafloor, using the neck to snap up prey. The head, while relatively small, was equipped with numerous sharp teeth pointing backward, ideal for gripping slippery fish. The eyes, positioned on the sides of the head, could track moving prey. The position of the nostrils on top of the head meant the creature could breathe at the surface while keeping most of its body submerged. Some paleontologists have proposed that Elasmosaurus hunted in a manner similar to modern spoonbills or skimmers, moving through water with the long neck extended, snapping at prey. Others suggest it hunted more deliberately, positioning itself in shallow water and using the long neck to probe into crevices and under rocks. The exact hunting strategy remains speculative, but the success of Elasmosaurus, it was a long-lived, successful lineage that persisted for millions of years, indicates that whatever strategy it employed was effective. The long neck of Elasmosaurus represents an extreme case of evolutionary specialization. Natural selection can drive organisms to extreme forms if those forms provide advantages in particular ecological roles. The Elasmosaurus filled a niche that no other creature exploited, that of an extremely long-necked hunter. As long as that niche remained available and provided sufficient food for a breeding population, the Elasmosaurus persisted. Approaching the Cretaceous, the end of the Jurassic as the late Jurassic drew to a close, around 145 million years ago, another extinction event occurred at the Jurassic-Cretaceous boundary. This event, while significant, was less severe than the Triassic-Jurassic extinction and far less catastrophic than the Permian-Triassic. Causes are debated but likely involved a combination of factors including climate change, sea level fluctuations, and possibly an asteroid impact, though this is more controversial than the asteroid cause of the end Cretaceous extinction. The impact on marine reptiles was significant but not devastating. Several groups of marine reptiles went extinct or declined. Some ichthyosaur lineages disappeared. Some plesiosaur lineages were eliminated. However, the remaining marine reptile groups, particularly the Ichthyosaurs, Pliosaurs, and certain Plesiosaur lineages, survived and continued into the Cretaceous period. For these survivors, the Cretaceous would present both challenges and opportunities, leading to the final and most remarkable chapter of marine reptile dominance before their ultimate extinction. Conclusion of Part 1. In this first part of our exploration of the rise and fall of marine reptiles, we have traced the dramatic journey from the Permian-Triassic extinction through the Jurassic period's golden age of marine reptile dominance. We've seen how terrestrial reptiles, facing a barren post-extinction world, adapted to marine life and rapidly diversified into numerous specialized forms. We've examined the remarkable anatomical and physiological changes these creatures underwent to become the supreme ocean predators of their time. The Ichthyosaurs, with their fish-like bodies and enormous eyes, hunted in the open ocean and deeper waters. The Plesiosaurs, with their remarkable necks and limbs used like oars, developed hunting strategies unique in the animal kingdom. The Pliosaurs, with their massive heads and powerful jaws, became apex predators that could take any prey in the marine realm. Together, these creatures ruled the oceans for over 150 million years, an unprecedented span of dominance. The late Jurassic represented the absolute peak of marine reptile success. Diversity was at its maximum, sizes reached their greatest extremes, and specializations became ever more remarkable. The oceans were an alien realm to us, filled with creatures adapted to marine life in ways that seem almost impossible from our modern perspective. But this dominance would not last forever. The Cretaceous period would bring new challenges, new competitors, and ultimately, new extinction pressures that would gradually erode the supremacy of marine reptiles. We'll explore these dramatic events, the rise of new predators that would challenge marine reptile dominance, the slow decline of once abundant lineages, and the final catastrophic extinction event that ended the age of marine reptiles, in Part 2 of this documentary. Thank you for joining us in this first exploration of the remarkable saga of marine reptile evolution and success. We hope you've enjoyed learning about these extraordinary creatures that once ruled Earth's oceans. Subscribe to our channel for Part 2, where we'll continue this journey into the Cretaceous period and witness the dramatic conclusion of the marine reptile era. Welcome back to our exploration of the rise and fall of marine reptiles. In Part 1, we trace the remarkable journey of these creatures from their origins as terrestrial animals venturing into post-extinction oceans, through their diversification and dominance during the Triassic and Jurassic periods. We witnessed the evolution of the Ichthyosaurs, the specialized long-necked Plesiosaurs, the powerful Pliosaurs, and saw how these creatures conquered the world's oceans, reaching their peak diversity and size during the late Jurassic. Now in Part 2, we move into the Cretaceous period, an era that would witness both the continued success of marine reptiles and, ultimately, the beginning of their decline. This period would bring new challenges, new competitors, and environmental changes that would gradually weaken the dominance these creatures had enjoyed for over 150 million years. We'll examine new forms of marine reptiles, including the remarkable Mosasaurs that would come to rival the ancient Pliosaurs in power and ferocity. We'll explore the scientific techniques that have revolutionized our understanding of these creatures, from CT scanning to isotopic analysis, and we'll trace the complex environmental and ecological changes that led to their eventual extinction. We want to extend our gratitude to all of you watching this continuation. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to our channel for future deep dives into Earth's prehistoric past. Now, let's continue our journey, stepping forward in time roughly 145 million years to the beginning of the Cretaceous period, when the oceans would soon witness the rise of some of the most formidable predators ever to swim Earth's waters. The Cretaceous period, a world in transition. The Cretaceous period, spanning from approximately 145 to 66 million years ago, was a time of significant change on Earth. The supercontinent Pangaea had long since broken apart, and by the Cretaceous, the continents were moving toward their modern positions. Sea levels were higher than they had been in the Jurassic, flooding vast areas of the continental shelves and creating enormous epicontinental seas, shallow inland seas that covered areas that are now dry land. The climate was warm, though not as uniformly warm as the Jurassic had been. There were cooler periods and warmer periods, fluctuations that would have significant impacts on marine ecosystems. The Cretaceous world was one of biological innovation and change. On land, the dinosaurs that had dominated the Mesozoic continued their reign, but the Cretaceous saw the evolution of flowering plants, which would fundamentally transform terrestrial ecosystems. In the oceans, the diversity of life was extraordinary. The ancient ammonites and other cephalopods continued their success. Fish diversified into new forms, many of which were more advanced than the fish of the Jurassic. Sharks and rays, which had always been present, continued to evolve and diversify. And in the Cretaceous oceans, marine reptiles continued to thrive. However, the composition of marine reptile fauna began to change. The Ichthyosaurs that had dominated the Jurassic oceans started to decline. Some lineages went extinct, others persisted but were reduced in diversity. The Plesiosaurs and Pliosaurs continued to be successful, evolving new forms and maintaining significant populations. And a new group of marine reptiles rose to prominence, the Mosasaurs, which would eventually become the dominant large predators of Cretaceous oceans. The decline of the Ichthyosaurs, having ruled the Jurassic oceans with extraordinary success, began to show signs of decline early in the Cretaceous. This decline was not sudden or catastrophic. It was a gradual process extending across tens of millions of years. By the end of the Cretaceous, Ichthyosaurs had completely disappeared from the fossil record, but this extinction was the culmination of a long period of reduced diversity and abundance. The causes of Ichthyosaur decline are debated among paleontologists, but several factors likely contributed. One possibility is increased competition from other marine predators, particularly the rising Mosasaurs. As Mosasaurs diversified and increased in abundance during the Cretaceous, they would have competed with Ichthyosaurs for the same prey resources. Mosasaurs, being newly evolved and not yet fully saturating their ecological roles, may have been more efficient predators in the changing Cretaceous environment, outcompeting Ichthyosaurs. Another factor may have been environmental change. The Cretaceous climate, while generally warm, experienced more fluctuations than the stable warmth of the Jurassic. Some Ichthyosaur lineages may have been specialized for the stable, warm Jurassic conditions and struggled to adapt to this increased variability. Additionally, changes in ocean chemistry and circulation patterns during the Cretaceous may have affected the distribution and abundance of the fish and squid that Ichthyosaurs preyed upon. The fossil record of Ichthyosaur decline is informative. In early Cretaceous deposits, Ichthyosaurs are still relatively abundant, though perhaps less common than they were in the late Jurassic. By the Middle Cretaceous, Ichthyosaur fossils become notably rarer. In late Cretaceous deposits, they are extremely rare, with only a few species known from the final stages of the Cretaceous. The last Ichthyosaurs appear to have disappeared around 90 million years ago, roughly 24 million years before the end Cretaceous extinction event that would eliminate the marine reptiles' remaining lineages. The extinction of the Ichthyosaurs is particularly poignant because these creatures had achieved such remarkable success. From their humble origins as small, newly adapted marine reptiles in the Triassic, they had evolved into some of the most successful and abundant marine animals the world has ever seen. The largest Ichthyosaurs surpassed 60 feet in length. Some Ichthyosaur species maintained populations over geographic ranges spanning thousands of kilometers. and then gradually this dominance faded and they disappeared entirely. What happened to the ecological roles that ichthyosaurs had filled? As the ichthyosaurs declined, other marine reptiles and fish apparently expanded to occupy their niches. The mosasaurs, in particular, appear to have filled many of the roles that ichthyosaurs had previously dominated. Large mosasaurs hunted the open ocean and the deep waters where large ichthyosaurs had hunted. Smaller mosasaurs occupied niches similar to smaller ichthyosaurs. It's a classic case of ecological replacement, where one group of organisms is replaced by another as environmental conditions change. The Plesiosaurs and Pliosaurs continued success in changing times while the ichthyosaurs were declining. The Plesiosaurs and Pliosaurs continued to be successful components of Cretaceous marine ecosystems. These creatures, having evolved different body plans and hunting strategies than the ichthyosaurs, appear to have been more adaptable to the changing environmental conditions of the Cretaceous. The long-necked Plesiosaurs, the Plesiosaurids, continued to diversify during the Cretaceous. Some lineages developed even longer necks than their Jurassic predecessors. Others evolved somewhat shorter necks, suggesting that different plesiosaur lineages were specializing into different ecological roles. The Elasmosaurus, which first appeared in the late Jurassic, persisted into and thrived during the Cretaceous, eventually becoming one of the last and largest plesiosaurs before the end Cretaceous extinction. New plesiosaur forms evolved during the Cretaceous as well. Some developed novel feeding strategies or body proportions. The family of plesiosaurs diversified into numerous species, each with subtle differences in neck length, body shape, and tooth structure, indicating specialization into different ecological roles. The success of plesiosaurs during the Cretaceous, at a time when ichthyosaurs were declining, suggests that the plesiosaur body plan, with its rowing motion flippers and flexible neck, was well suited to the Cretaceous marine environment. The Pliosaurs, the short-necked, heavily built marine reptiles with massive heads and powerful jaws, also continued to evolve during the Cretaceous. The early Cretaceous saw the continuation of pliosaur lineages from the Jurassic, but the middle and late Cretaceous witnessed the evolution of new pliosaur forms, often of enormous size. The Cronisaurus from the early Cretaceous was a massive pliosaur reaching lengths of 35 feet or more. Later Cretaceous pliosaurs like Leopleurodon and its relatives reached comparable sizes, if not larger. These massive pliosaurs of the Cretaceous were apex predators of the highest order, with heads reaching 7 or 8 feet in length, jaws capable of delivering crushing bites, and bodies muscular and flexible enough to execute rapid attacks. These creatures were formidable hunters. The prey of large Cretaceous pliosaurs likely included large fish, squid, smaller marine reptiles, and possibly even small dinosaurs that ventured into the water. Some paleontologists have speculated that large pliosaurs may have been capable of hunting in coordinated groups, similar to modern orcas, though this remains speculative. The rise of the Mosasaurs, apex predators of the Cretaceous while the ichthyosaurs declined, and the Plesiosaurs and Pliosaurs continued to thrive, a new group of marine reptiles rose to dominance, the Mosasaurs. These creatures would eventually become the defining marine reptiles of the late Cretaceous, and their rise represents one of the most significant shifts in marine predator assemblages during the entire age of marine reptiles. The Mosasaurs did not originate in the Cretaceous. Their evolutionary roots trace back to the Jurassic or possibly earlier, but they did not become significant components of marine ecosystems until the early Cretaceous. The early Mosasaurs were relatively small, perhaps 3 to 6 feet in length, and occupied ecological roles that were not directly in competition with the dominant large marine reptiles of their time. However, as the Cretaceous progressed, Mosasaurs diversified rapidly, evolving larger body sizes, more specialized teeth and jaws, and increasingly sophisticated hunting strategies. The anatomical innovations of Mosasaurs are particularly interesting. The Mosasaur skull was highly modified for a predatory lifestyle. The jaws were large and could open to impressive angles, allowing for the consumption of large prey. The teeth were sharp, curved, and designed for gripping rather than grinding. The eyes were large, positioned to provide good forward and lateral vision. The body was long and flexible, powered by a tail with a fluke similar to that of sharks, as we now understand from fossil evidence. One of the most remarkable features of Mosasaurs was their advanced jaw mechanics. Unlike most reptiles, which have relatively simple jaw joints, Mosasaurs possessed flexible skull components that allowed their jaws to expand and contract in complex ways. This mechanism, shared with modern snakes, allowed Mosasaurs to consume prey larger than their own heads. A mosasaur could unhinge its jaws, expand its throat, and swallow a large fish whole. This capability made them extraordinarily efficient predators. By the Middle Cretaceous, mosasaurs had evolved to impressive sizes. Forms like Pliosaurus reached lengths of 30 feet or more, but the greatest mosasaurs were yet to come. In the late Cretaceous, mosasaurs achieved their maximum size and diversity. Mosasaur fossils from the late Cretaceous are abundant and diverse, found in deposits across the globe, indicating that mosasaurs had achieved near-global distribution and were significant components of nearly all marine ecosystems. Mosasaurus, the king of the late Cretaceous, the creature that embodies the success of mosasaurs and represents the apex of their evolution, is Mosasaurus itself. This animal, which lived during the late Cretaceous, represents the largest and most formidable mosasaur ever to evolve. Estimates of Mosasaurus size have varied over the years as paleontologists have refined their understanding based on newly discovered and analyzed fossils, but most current estimates place large individuals at lengths of 45 to 56 feet, with some estimates suggesting even larger specimens may have existed. Mosasaurus was a creature of terrifying power. The skull was enormous, reaching lengths of 4 to 5 feet or more. The jaws were lined with sharp, curved teeth, each one a formidable weapon. The eye sockets were large, accommodating eyes that would have provided excellent vision for hunting in the turbid waters of late Cretaceous seas. The body, extending behind the skull, was muscular and flexible, each segment controlled by powerful muscles and supported by vertebrae that allowed for the undulating motions necessary for propulsion through water. The limbs of Mosasaurus had evolved from the fins of earlier marine reptiles. The flippers, though more flexible than those of some marine reptiles, were still powerful appendages used for steering and maneuvering, but the primary propulsive force came from the tail. Recent analysis of mosasaur tail structure, based on careful examination of complete fossil skeletons and the flexibility of the vertebrae, has revealed that mosasaurs possessed vertical tail flukes, much like modern sharks. This was a significant revelation, overturning the older assumption that mosasaurs had eel-like, side-to-side undulating tails. What prey did Mosasaurus hunt? The answer is, essentially everything in the late Cretaceous seas that was smaller than itself. Fossil evidence of mosasaur meals comes from several sources. First, there are gastroliths, stones that have been found in the stomach cavities of fossilized mosasaurs. These stones are thought to have aided in digestion, much like the stones that modern crocodilians swallow to help break down food. Second, there are coprolites, fossilized feces, that are believed to be from mosasaurs and contain fragments of prey. Large Mosasaurus likely hunted the most abundant prey available. In the late Cretaceous, the oceans were full of fish, including large forms, swimming reptiles such as small Plesiosaurs or Ichthyosaurs, if any still existed by the late Cretaceous, and various cephalopods. Smaller mosasaurs likely specialized in smaller fish and invertebrates, but large Mosasaurus, with its enormous size and power, could have hunted virtually any prey it could catch, including other large marine reptiles. Evidence of predation on other marine reptiles by large mosasaurs comes from fossil remains bearing mosasaur tooth marks, and in some cases, from fossils showing mosasaur teeth embedded in the bones of plesiosaurs and other marine reptiles. This indicates that while plesiosaurs and mosasaurs coexisted in the late Cretaceous, the top predators of one group did not hesitate to prey on the other when the opportunity arose. The dominance of Mosasaurus in late Cretaceous ecosystems is evident from the abundance of mosasaur fossils in deposits from this time. Wherever paleontologists excavate marine deposits from the late Cretaceous, mosasaur remains are typically present. In some deposits, mosasaur fossils are nearly as abundant as fish remains. This indicates that mosasaurs were not rare, specialized creatures, but rather common, abundant predators in nearly every marine ecosystem. Mosasaur diversity, specialists and hunters. While Mosasaurus represents the largest and most iconic mosasaur, the mosasaur group as a whole was extraordinarily diverse. By the late Cretaceous, mosasaurs had evolved numerous forms, each specialized in subtle ways for different ecological roles and hunting strategies. Some mosasaurs, like Pliosaurus, were more slender and streamlined than Mosasaurus, suggesting they were specialized for faster, more agile hunting in open water. These forms likely hunted fast-moving prey like fish and squid, relying on speed and agility rather than sheer size and power. Other mosasaurs, like Tylosaurus, rivaled Mosasaurus in size and were equally formidable apex predators. Tylosaurus, which ranged across the western interior seaway of North America and other Cretaceous seas, reached lengths comparable to Mosasaurus and possessed similarly massive heads and powerful jaws. The coexistence of multiple giant mosasaurs in the same regions suggests that these creatures may have occupied slightly different ecological niches, perhaps hunting at different depths or focusing on different prey, or they may have simply been numerous enough that there was room for multiple apex predators in the same ecosystem. Some mosasaurs evolved specialized feeding strategies. Certain forms developed flattened teeth, suggesting a diet of hard-shelled prey like shellfish and crustaceans. Others developed more needle-like teeth optimized for gripping slippery fish. Still others developed teeth that combined characteristics of both, suggesting a varied diet. There were even mosasaurs that appear to have been specialized for hunting in fresh or brackish water. The western interior seaway of North America, which covered vast areas of the continent, supported distinctive mosasaur populations adapted to its specific conditions. Mosasaurs from marine environments in Europe show different characteristics than those from the western interior seaway, suggesting regional specialization and adaptation. The diversity of mosasaurs speaks to the success of this lineage and their adaptability. From small, nimble hunters to massive apex predators, from fish specialists to shell crackers, mosasaurs filled a bewildering array of ecological roles. Their success during the late Cretaceous was unparalleled among marine reptiles, and by the end of the Cretaceous, mosasaurs had become the dominant large marine predators across the globe. Scientific revelations, CT scanning and soft tissue analysis. Before we continue our narrative of marine reptile decline and extinction, it's worth noting the significant advances in our understanding of these creatures that have come from modern paleontological techniques. The revolution in paleontology over the past few decades has been driven by technological innovations that allow scientists to examine fossils in ways that were previously impossible. CT scanning, computed tomography, is one of the most powerful tools paleontologists have gained access to. This technology, which works by taking X-ray images from many angles and reconstructing them into a three-dimensional image, allows scientists to see the internal structures of fossils without damaging them. Using CT scanning, paleontologists can examine the brain structure of marine reptiles, the internal cavities in their bones, and the arrangement of muscles and other soft tissues preserved by mineralization. Through CT scanning, scientists have learned remarkable details about marine reptile sensory systems. The brain structure of Ichthyosaurs, revealed through CT analysis, shows that these creatures had highly developed visual cortices, brain regions dedicated to processing visual information. This aligns with the fossil evidence of their enormous eyes and supports the conclusion that vision was crucial to their hunting strategies. Similarly, plesiosaur brains examined through CT scanning show the importance of olfaction, smell, with enlarged olfactory lobes, suggesting these creatures relied heavily on detecting prey by chemical cues. Isotopic analysis, the examination of different ratios of stable isotopes in bone and tooth material, has revolutionized our understanding of marine reptile metabolism, diet, and ecology. Oxygen isotopes in fossilized bone incorporate differently depending on the metabolic rate of the organism. Warm-blooded animals have different oxygen isotope ratios than cold-blooded animals. By measuring these ratios, paleontologists can infer whether marine reptiles were ectothermic or endothermic. The results of these analyses have been striking. Multiple studies on ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs have suggested that these creatures possessed metabolic rates consistent with partial endothermy. They were warm-blooded or at least metabolically elevated compared to modern reptiles. This implies that these creatures were energetically costly to maintain, but could achieve high activity levels and sustained muscular performance. Carbon and nitrogen isotopes in fossils reveal information about diet. Different isotope ratios are incorporated into organisms depending on what they eat. By analyzing the carbon and nitrogen isotope ratios in marine reptile fossils, paleontologists can make inferences about their prey and their position in the food web. These analyses have confirmed that large marine reptiles occupied apex predator positions, feeding on a variety of prey from different trophic levels. Rare earth element analysis, studying the concentration of trace elements in fossils, has provided information about the habitats and ecology of marine reptiles. Different elements are concentrated in different environments, and by analyzing fossilized material, paleontologists can determine whether an individual lived in fresh water, brackish water, or fully marine environments. Environmental changes in the Cretaceous. The CENOMANINTURONIAN anoxic event, understanding the decline and eventual extinction of marine reptiles, requires understanding the environmental changes that occurred during the Cretaceous, particularly in the late Cretaceous when these creatures were at their peak. One of the most significant environmental events of the Cretaceous was the Cenomanian-Turonian anoxic event, occurring approximately 93 to 94 million years ago, well before the end Cretaceous extinction. The Cenomanian-Turonian anoxic event, or OAA2, Oceanic Anoxic Event 2, was a period of global ocean deoxygenation. For reasons that are not entirely understood but are thought to relate to massive volcanic activity releasing carbon dioxide and causing warming, the oceans became profoundly oxygen depleted. Large areas of the ocean, particularly at intermediate depths and in restricted basins, became essentially anaerobic, completely lacking in dissolved oxygen. The consequences for marine life were severe. Creatures that depended on oxygen to breathe suffocated. Fish populations declined drastically in affected regions. The food web, which depended on the ability of organisms to survive and function, collapsed. Ammonites, which had been extraordinarily abundant and diverse in the Cretaceous, were decimated in many regions. Planktonic organisms that formed the base of the food web died in vast numbers. However, the impact on large marine reptiles was more complex than simple suffocation from lack of oxygen. The oceans were not uniformly anaerobic. Oxygen-rich surface waters and deep waters persisted in some regions. Large marine reptiles, particularly those that were air breathers and could migrate between regions, might have been less severely impacted than smaller organisms that could not escape the oxygen-depleted zones. Nevertheless, the Cenomanian-Turonian event had lasting effects on marine ecosystems. The recovery of affected ecosystems took millions of years. The composition of marine life changed. Certain groups that had dominated pre-event ecosystems never regained their former abundance. This event can be seen, in retrospect, as one of several environmental shocks that gradually eroded the stability of the marine ecosystems that had supported marine reptile dominance. Predation within marine reptile communities. One fascinating aspect of late Cretaceous marine ecosystems was the complex web of predator-prey relationships among marine reptiles themselves. The coexistence of multiple large predatory marine reptiles, various Mosasaurs, Plesiosaurs, and Pliosaurs, in the same oceans created a complex competitive environment and intricate predation networks. Evidence of predation among marine reptiles comes from several sources. First, there are direct fossil associations, where the remains of one marine reptile have been found inside the body cavity of another, indicating that one had consumed the other. Second, there are fossil remains bearing tooth marks from marine reptile teeth, indicating unsuccessful or successful predation events. Third, there are fossilized feces, coprolites, that contain fragments of marine reptile bone and tissue. Large mosasaurs clearly preyed on smaller mosasaurs. The fossil record contains numerous examples of mosasaur teeth embedded in the bones of smaller mosasaurs. Similarly, large plesiosaurs and pliosaurs may have preyed on smaller members of their own groups or on smaller marine reptiles of different species. The question of whether competition between mosasaurs and plesiosaurs contributed to the decline of plesiosaurs is intriguing. By the end of the Cretaceous, while mosasaurs were still abundant and diverse, plesiosaurs appear to have been less numerous and less diverse. One hypothesis is that mosasaurs, being newer to marine ecosystems and not yet fully saturating their ecological roles, were more competitive than the long-established plesiosaurs, eventually displacing them from many ecological niches. However, competition and predation were likely not the only factors affecting marine reptile populations. Environmental changes, availability of specific prey types, and perhaps changes in breeding success all likely played roles in determining the relative abundance of different marine reptile groups. The ammonite decline and its implications. While discussing the challenges marine reptiles faced in the Cretaceous, we must address the fate of one of their primary food sources, ammonites. These cephalopods, related to modern nautiluses, were extraordinarily abundant throughout the Cretaceous. Ammonite fossils are found in virtually every Cretaceous marine deposit. In some layers, ammonite shells are so abundant that they form a significant portion of the rock itself. Yet the diversity and abundance of ammonites changed dramatically during the Cretaceous. The early Cretaceous saw tremendous ammonite diversity, with hundreds of distinct species coexisting in contemporary oceans. The Middle Cretaceous witnessed continued ammonite diversity, though some studies suggest subtle declines in certain regions or during specific intervals. By the late Cretaceous, ammonite diversity had declined noticeably from its Cretaceous peak. The causes of ammonite decline are debated. Ocean chemistry changes, competition from more derived cephalopods, and predation pressure from marine reptiles have all been proposed. Whatever the causes, the reduction in ammonite abundance and diversity in the late Cretaceous would have affected the marine reptiles that preyed upon them. Smaller marine reptiles that specialized in eating ammonites would have faced reduced prey availability. This in turn may have affected the reproduction and survival of these predators. For a creature like a plesiosaur, dependent on a specific type of prey, changes in prey abundance and availability could be catastrophic. If ammonites declined, plesiosaurs specialized on ammonites would have struggled. They might have been forced to compete with other predators for alternative prey or to shift their ecological roles. Some plesiosaur species may have gone locally or globally extinct as their preferred prey became scarce. The relationship between prey availability and predator success is fundamental to ecology. In an ocean ecosystem, the rise and fall of prey species directly affects predator populations. The decline of ammonites in the late Cretaceous would have rippled through marine ecosystems, affecting not just marine reptiles but all organisms that depended on ammonites as food. The late Cretaceous, a world in flux. The late Cretaceous, spanning from approximately 100 to 66 million years ago, was a period of remarkable biological activity and environmental change. It was a time when the world was in transition, though no one living at that time could have known how dramatic that transition would become. The continents continued their movement toward their modern positions. North America and South America began to separate from Europe and Africa. Australia began to separate from Antarctica. The Indian subcontinent moved toward Asia, preparing for the dramatic collision that would eventually create the Himalayas. These continental movements had profound effects on ocean circulation patterns, which in turn affected climate and the distribution of marine life. The late Cretaceous also saw the evolution of new groups of organisms. Flowering plants, having originated earlier in the Cretaceous, diversified explosively during the late Cretaceous, transforming terrestrial ecosystems. Mammals, which had been small, marginal creatures throughout the Mesozoic, began to diversify and occupy new ecological roles, though they remain minor components of ecosystems compared to dinosaurs. Birds, having evolved from theropod dinosaurs, continued to diversify and were beginning to fill ecological roles previously occupied only by pterosaurs and other flying reptiles. In the oceans, the late Cretaceous was a time of biological stability compared to the environmental shocks of earlier periods, though this stability would prove illusory. Marine reptiles, while beginning to decline in some groups, were still abundant and diverse. Mosasaurs reached their maximum size and diversity. Sharks continued to evolve and diversify. The fish of the late Cretaceous were modern in many respects, having evolved body plans and lifestyles recognizable to modern ichthyologists. Yet beneath this apparent stability, environmental stresses were accumulating. The climate at the very end of the Cretaceous appears to have been cooling gradually, a trend that would affect marine ecosystems in subtle but significant ways. Volcanic activity was increasing in many regions, releasing gases that altered ocean chemistry and potentially affected climate. The food web of marine ecosystems, while still productive, was undergoing subtle changes in composition and abundance that would have cascading effects on predators at higher trophic levels. The final chapter, the late Cretaceous decline of marine reptiles. By the very end of the Cretaceous period, in the final few million years before the catastrophic extinction event that would define the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, marine reptile diversity and abundance had begun to decline noticeably. While Mosasaurs remained abundant and diverse until the very end, other marine reptile groups were in clear decline. Plesiosaurs, which had been major components of marine ecosystems throughout the Cretaceous, appear to have been less abundant in the latest Cretaceous rocks. The diversity of plesiosaur species had declined significantly by the end of the period. Some plesiosaur lineages had gone extinct, while others persisted in reduced numbers. By the time of the end Cretaceous extinction event, plesiosaurs were less abundant than they had been in the middle and early late Cretaceous. The Ichthyosaurs, as we mentioned earlier, had already been extinct for roughly 25 million years by the end of the Cretaceous. The last Ichthyosaurs disappeared during the Middle-Late Cretaceous transition, having gradually declined throughout the Middle Cretaceous until they vanished from the fossil record entirely. The Pliosaurs, similarly, appear to have been declining by the end of the Cretaceous. While Pliosaurs had been formidable apex predators throughout the Cretaceous, they became progressively rarer in late Cretaceous deposits. By the very end of the Cretaceous, pliosaur fossils are extremely rare, suggesting that this group had also declined severely before the end Cretaceous extinction event. What caused these declines in marine reptile groups other than Mosasaurs? The answers are likely complex and multifactorial. Competition with Mosasaurs undoubtedly played a role. Mosasaurs were diverse, abundant, and apparently more competitive in late Cretaceous marine ecosystems than the other marine reptile groups. Environmental changes, including shifts in ocean temperature, chemistry, and circulation, would have affected different groups differently. Changes in prey availability, particularly the decline of ammonites that likely affected Plesiosaurs, would have selectively impacted different predator groups. Additionally, there may have been intrinsic biological factors at play. The Ichthyosaurs, having dominated for over 150 million years, may have been an aging lineage, evolutionary speaking, less adaptable to changing conditions than newer groups like the Mosasaurs. The Plesiosaurs, with their specialized body plans and hunting strategies, may have lacked the flexibility to adapt to changing prey and environmental conditions. The Pliosaurs, while powerful hunters, may have been dependent on prey or environmental conditions that changed in the late Cretaceous. The Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, the asteroid impact for 145 million years, an almost incomprehensible span of time, marine reptiles had dominated Earth's oceans. They had survived the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event that killed other creatures. They had thrived in the stable, warm oceans of the Jurassic and early Cretaceous. They had diversified and specialized into countless forms, evolving strategies to hunt in every major marine ecosystem and at every depth from shallow seas to the abyssal ocean. Yet all of this dominance, all of this evolutionary success came to an end in a moment, a geological instant that can be measured in seconds and minutes rather than years or millennia. Approximately 66 million years ago, at the very end of the Cretaceous period, an asteroid roughly 6.2 miles in diameter struck the Earth. The impact location was what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, creating the Chicxulub crater. The energy released by this collision was incomprehensible, equivalent to trillions of megatons of TNT, millions of times more powerful than the largest human-made explosions. The impact vaporized rock, excavated a crater spanning nearly 120 miles in diameter and over a half-mile deep, and hurled tremendous quantities of material into the atmosphere. The immediate effects of the impact would have been catastrophic. The shock wave from the impact would have generated earthquakes of unprecedented magnitude. Tsunamis, triggered by the impact and by submarine landslides caused by the impact's tremors, would have raced across oceans and devastated coastal areas. Wildfires would have erupted across continents, ignited by the heat released by the impact and by returning meteorite material burning through the atmosphere. But the long-term effects were even more devastating. The asteroid impact threw immense quantities of dust, ash, and aerosols into the atmosphere. A phenomenon known as impact winter followed, in which the sun's radiation was blocked by these particles, causing global temperatures to plummet. Photosynthesis essentially ceased as sunlight failed to reach the surface of the Earth. The food chains of virtually every ecosystem collapsed as plants died and the organisms that depended on them starved. In the oceans, the impact had specific, devastating effects on marine ecosystems. The shock wave and tsunami would have churned the upper water column, mixing water in unprecedented ways. The dust and aerosols falling into the oceans would have blocked sunlight and reduced photosynthesis. The cooling of ocean surface waters would have stratified the water column, preventing the mixing of oxygen-rich surface waters with deeper waters. Many parts of the oceans would have become hypoxic, severely oxygen-depleted, within days or weeks of the impact. The plankton, which form the base of virtually all marine food chains, were decimated. Diatoms and dinoflagellates, the dominant forms of photosynthetic plankton, either died or dropped into dormancy. The small fish and invertebrates that fed on plankton starved. The prey base that marine reptiles depended on evaporated. For creatures like Mosasaurus, massive apex predators dependent on a continuous supply of prey, the extinction of their food source was fatal. A 50-foot mosasaur could not survive on the scarce, sporadic meals that might still be available in the chaotic post-impact oceans. The energy demands of such a large creature would have exceeded what could be obtained from the devastated food web. The Plesiosaurs and remaining Mosasaurs did not die instantly in the impact itself. Instead, they starved to death in the weeks and months following the impact as their prey disappeared. Some may have persisted for months or even years after the impact, living off stored energy and consuming increasingly scarce prey, but eventually all of these creatures died, and no survivors remained to repopulate the oceans when ecological recovery began. Extinction through time, the multifactorial causes. While the asteroid impact delivered the coup de grace to the remaining marine reptiles, it's important to recognize that the extinction of marine reptiles was not solely the result of this single event. As we've traced through this narrative, marine reptiles were in decline in the millions of years leading up to the impact. The Ichthyosaurs had already been extinct for millions of years. The Plesiosaurs and Pliosaurs were reduced in diversity and abundance. Even the Mosasaurs, though still relatively abundant, were not at the peak diversity and abundance they had achieved in the Middle and early Late Cretaceous. The extinction of marine reptiles was thus a multi-step process. The first step was the gradual decline of Ichthyosaurs and Pliosaurs throughout the Cretaceous, driven by a combination of competition with Mosasaurs, environmental changes, and changes in prey availability. The second step was the further decline of Plesiosaurs in the Late Cretaceous, as their preferred prey declined and competition with Mosasaurs increased. The third step was the final extinction event, when the asteroid impact devastated global ecosystems and eliminated all remaining marine reptiles. This multifactorial extinction model is increasingly recognized as more realistic than previous models that attributed marine reptile extinction solely to the asteroid impact. The evidence shows that ecosystems were already stressed, that certain lineages were already declining, and that environmental conditions had been changing. The asteroid impact did not occur in a stable ecosystem, but rather was the final stress applied to already stressed populations and ecosystems. The extinction of different groups, timing and CAUSES. It's worth examining the extinction of different marine reptile groups in some detail, as the timing and circumstances differed among groups. Ichthyosaurs. These creatures disappeared gradually throughout the Cretaceous, with the last species going extinct around 90 million years ago. The causes included competition with Mosasaurs, environmental changes, and possibly changes in prey availability. The extinction of Ichthyosaurs occurred well before the asteroid impact, and was likely driven primarily by ecological factors rather than catastrophic events. Pliosaurs, these short-necked, powerfully jawed marine reptiles, declined throughout the Cretaceous. They appear to have been relatively rare by the end of the Cretaceous, and were likely eliminated by the asteroid impact, having already been reduced to low populations by prior declines. Plesiosaurs, long-necked Plesiosaurs, persisted longer than Pliosaurs but were also in decline by the end of the Cretaceous. The fossil record suggests that Plesiosaurs became increasingly rare in the latest Cretaceous, and they were completely eliminated by the asteroid impact. Mosasaurs, these creatures, having risen to dominance during the late Cretaceous and still abundant at the very end of the Cretaceous, were abruptly eliminated by the asteroid impact. Unlike other marine reptile groups, Mosasaurs did not have a long prior decline. They were killed directly by the environmental catastrophe. Immediate effects of the extinction. The Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods, marked by the asteroid impact, is one of the most studied geological boundaries in the world. At sites around the globe, paleontologists can examine rocks that were deposited immediately before and immediately after the impact. What they find is dramatic, a sudden change in the fossil record, with Cretaceous species disappearing and being replaced by Paleogene species. In marine deposits, this boundary is typically marked by an iridium-enriched layer, a thin layer of rock containing unusually high concentrations of iridium, an element that is rare on Earth but abundant in asteroids. This iridium-enriched layer, known as the KPG boundary layer, K for Cretaceous, PG for Paleogene, is found in marine deposits around the world, evidence of the global distribution of material ejected by the impact. Below the KPG boundary, the rocks contain fossils of Mosasaurs, Plesiosaurs, Ichthyosaurs, and older Cretaceous rocks, ammonites, and various fish species. Above the boundary, these creatures are gone. In their place are fossils of creatures that survived the extinction event, small fish, sharks, rays, squid, and other organisms that could survive the environmental catastrophe. The extinction at the KPG boundary was not selective in the sense that some groups survived entirely while others were completely eliminated. Some groups of marine organisms, like sharks and rays, experienced severe declines, but some species survived. Others, like Ichthyosaurs, Mosasaurs, Plesiosaurs, and ammonites, were completely eliminated. Not a single species survived to see the Paleogene. What survived the extinction? The survivors' understanding which creatures survived the end Cretaceous extinction provides insight into what traits were advantageous when facing such a catastrophic environmental change. Several factors appear to have been important: small body size. Creatures with small body sizes and correspondingly low energy requirements were more likely to survive. Small fish, small sharks, small reptiles, and small mammals all survived in greater proportions than their larger relatives. Ecological flexibility. Organisms with flexible diets and ability to occupy different ecological niches were more likely to survive. Omnivores fared better than strict carnivores or herbivores, as they could shift their diet depending on what was available. Ability to enter dormancy or slow metabolism. Creatures capable of surviving long periods with minimal food or water had a significant advantage. Some fish may have survived in dormant states. Some small reptiles may have entered torpor or hibernation. Organisms that could dramatically slow their metabolism would consume less energy and could survive longer on stored reserves. Aquatic lifestyle, particularly in fresh water. Marine creatures were generally more severely impacted than freshwater creatures, likely because the marine food web collapsed more completely. However, oceanic creatures that could also survive in brackish or fresh water, or that could access freshwater refugia, had improved chances of survival. Some fish species that existed in both marine and freshwater environments had better survival rates than purely marine species. Egg-laying reproduction. While live-bearing, viviparous reproduction allows for greater maternal investment and protection of offspring, it also makes reproduction dependent on the mother's ability to maintain the pregnancy. In a starving world, pregnant females might be less likely to successfully reproduce. Egg-laying oviparous species, while requiring less parental care, could potentially lay eggs and abandon them, with those eggs surviving even if the parents subsequently died. The survivors of the KPG extinction event were mostly small, ecologically flexible creatures. The absence of large apex predators, no Mosasaurs, no Plesiosaurs, no large dinosaurs, created ecological opportunities in the Paleogene. The radiation of mammals, which would eventually fill the roles previously occupied by dinosaurs and marine reptiles, began in this post-extinction world. The legacy of marine reptiles, ecological ROLES and evolutionary paths. The extinction of marine reptiles created ecological vacancies in the world's oceans. For millions of years, the largest marine predators had been reptiles. This role, along with many others that marine reptiles had filled, was now open for other organisms to occupy. The recovery of marine ecosystems after the KPG extinction took millions of years. Initially, the oceans were dominated by small creatures, small fish, small sharks, small squid, but gradually, as ecosystems recovered and food chains rebuilt themselves, larger creatures evolved to fill the vacant ecological roles. One group that was positioned to take advantage of these opportunities was the cetaceans, whales, and dolphins. Those cetaceans would not appear in the fossil record until tens of millions of years after the KPG extinction. When they eventually evolved, they would come to occupy ecological roles that were remarkably similar to those previously occupied by marine reptiles. The convergent evolution between marine reptiles and cetaceans is striking. Large cetaceans like blue whales and sperm whales are apex marine predators, hunting large fish and squid, much as Mosasaurs and Plesiosaurs had done. Medium-sized cetaceans hunt smaller fish and squid, filling roles similar to smaller marine reptiles. Some cetaceans, like narwhals and belugas, are specialized hunters in polar and subpolar waters, occupying ecological roles similar to some plesiosaurs. The mechanism by which cetaceans achieved this ecological similarity, despite being mammals rather than reptiles, and despite being tens of millions of years removed from the extinction of marine reptiles, is natural selection. In the Paleogene and Neogene oceans, any cetacean lineage that possessed traits allowing it to be an effective marine predator would be favored by natural selection. Because the ecological roles of marine predator, swift hunter, deep diving specialist, and other such roles existed, and because natural selection favors the evolution of traits suited to filling available roles, marine mammals evolved to fill these roles. The result is remarkable. Cetaceans, which are mammals descended from terrestrial ancestors and thus very different at the molecular level from the reptilian marine reptiles, have evolved to occupy nearly the same ecological roles and have developed many of the same morphological adaptations: streamlined bodies, flippers, powerful tail flukes, large brains capable of sophisticated hunting strategies and social behavior. Scientific RE evaluation and modern understanding. Our understanding of marine reptiles has undergone dramatic revision in recent decades, thanks to advances in paleontological techniques and the discovery of new fossils. Some of these revisions have been fundamental to our understanding of how these creatures lived and hunted. One major revision concerns the tail flukes of Mosasaurs. For many decades, paleontologists assumed Mosasaurs had eel-like tails that undulated from side to side in a vertical plane. This assumption was based partly on depictions in older paleontological artwork and partly on the assumption that tails worked a certain way based on modern reptiles. However, detailed analysis of mosasaur vertebral column flexibility, comparison with shark skeletons, and theoretical biomechanical modeling have led most paleontologists to conclude that mosasaurs had horizontal tail flukes, similar to sharks. This represents a significant change in how we visualize these creatures moving through the water. Another revision concerns marine reptile metabolism. As we discussed earlier, evidence from bone histology, isotopic analysis, and growth patterns has led paleontologists to conclude that many marine reptiles were warm-blooded, or at least had elevated metabolic rates compared to modern reptiles. This was not universally accepted when first proposed. Many paleontologists maintained that all Mesozoic reptiles were cold-blooded. However, the accumulation of evidence has made the warm-blooded hypothesis the consensus view. The reproductive biology of marine reptiles has also been refined. The discovery of fossilized embryos within ichthyosaur bodies and the analysis of growth patterns in bones has confirmed that at least ichthyosaurs were viviparous, giving birth to live young. Evidence for viviparity in plesiosaurs and mosasaurs is less direct, but the reproductive strategies of these creatures are increasingly understood through analysis of growth patterns and bone structure. The discovery of fossilized soft tissue has also revolutionized understanding of marine reptiles. The skin impressions preserved in some ichthyosaur and plesiosaur fossils have shown that these creatures had smooth skin, without prominent scales, more similar to modern dolphins than to modern reptiles. This represents a significant revision in how we visualize the appearance of these creatures. Lessons from the rise and fall of marine reptiles. As we near the end of our exploration of marine reptiles, it's worth reflecting on what their history teaches us about evolution, ecology, and extinction. Several important lessons emerge. 1. Ecological dominance is not permanent. Marine reptiles dominated the oceans for over 150 million years, a span longer than mammals have existed. Yet they were vulnerable, and when environmental conditions changed, their dominance ended. No organism, no matter how successful, is guaranteed to persist indefinitely. Ecological roles that seem secure can be disrupted by new competitors, environmental changes, or catastrophic events. 2. Evolution is not progressive. Marine reptiles did not evolve toward a predetermined goal or endpoint. Instead, they evolved to fit available ecological roles and environmental conditions. When conditions changed, evolution produced different forms suited to new conditions. The mosasaurs that rose to dominance in the late Cretaceous were not better or more advanced than the plesiosaurs they may have displaced. They were simply better suited to the specific conditions of the late Cretaceous. 3. Specialization can be a liability. Creatures that became highly specialized for specific prey or environmental conditions faced greater vulnerability if those conditions changed. The long-necked plesiosaurs, exquisitely adapted for their particular hunting strategy, proved less flexible when prey composition changed and new competitors arrived. Generalists with more flexible strategies and diets often fare better when environmental changes occur. 4. Extinction is often multifactorial. The extinction of marine reptiles was not caused solely by the asteroid impact, though that was the final blow. Instead, it resulted from a combination of factors: competition from new predators, environmental changes, changes in prey availability, and ultimately, the asteroid impact. Understanding extinction requires understanding all the factors that stressed populations, not just the final catastrophic event. 5. Ocean ecosystems are productive but vulnerable. The abundance of marine reptiles demonstrates the productivity of ocean ecosystems, the amount of biomass and energy available to support life. Yet the extinction of marine reptiles demonstrates that even highly productive ecosystems can be devastated by environmental change. The stability of modern oceans cannot be taken for granted. Rapid changes in ocean chemistry, temperature, or circulation can have catastrophic impacts on marine life. The post-extinction world, recovery and replacement. Following the KPG extinction, the world's oceans took millions of years to fully recover. The earliest Paleogene oceans were relatively impoverished compared to the productive Cretaceous seas. Plankton populations were low, fish were small and relatively rare. Sharks and rays dominated the large predator roles in the early Paleogene because they were more generalistic in their needs and could survive on sporadic, scattered prey. Over tens of millions of years, marine ecosystems gradually rebuilt. New fish groups evolved and diversified. Sharks and rays diversified into numerous new forms. Marine birds, surviving the KPG extinction in small numbers, diversified into new forms including diving hunters like penguins and cormorants. And eventually, cetaceans evolved and came to fill roles similar to those previously occupied by marine reptiles. The timeline is important. The first cetaceans appeared in the fossil record around 50 million years after the KPG extinction in the early Eocene. The fossil record shows the gradual evolution of cetaceans from terrestrial mammals. Early cetaceans like Ambulocetus and Basilosaurus show intermediate characteristics between land mammals and modern whales, with hind limbs still partially functional, modified ears suggesting recent adaptation to aquatic hearing, and body shapes that were adapted to marine life but not yet fully optimized. Over the subsequent millions of years, cetaceans became increasingly specialized for marine life. The hind limbs reduced and became vestigial. The body shape became increasingly streamlined. The flippers became more powerful. The tail developed flukes. Eventually, by the mid-Miocene, roughly 15 to 20 million years ago, cetaceans included forms like the ancient baleen whales and sperm whales that were as large and formidable as some of the late Cretaceous Mosasaurs. Human fascination with marine reptiles have captivated human imagination far beyond their role in scientific understanding. They appear in artwork, in literature, in popular culture, and in the museums and fossil collections around the world. Why does this extinct group of creatures generate such fascination? Part of the appeal is their remarkable size and power. Mosasaurus, 50 feet long and the apex predator of its time, represents the ultimate predatory power. The image of such a creature hunting large prey resonates with something deep in human psychology. Part of the appeal is their otherness. Unlike dinosaurs, which dominate public consciousness through the medium of cinema and popular entertainment, marine reptiles exist in a realm that is less familiar to most people. They inhabited a world we cannot easily access or visualize. This sense of mystery and the unknown is deeply appealing. Part of the appeal is scientific. The questions about how these creatures lived, what they ate, how they hunted, and why they went extinct are fascinating questions that remain partially unanswered despite our best paleontological efforts. The process of discovery, of gradually unveiling the secrets of ancient creatures through careful examination of fossils and application of modern scientific techniques, has an inherent appeal, and part of the appeal may be a sense of awe and humility. The marine reptiles remind us that Earth's history is vast, that creatures of extraordinary power and size have lived and disappeared, that the dominance of any group of organisms is temporary and subject to change. This perspective can be either sobering or inspiring, depending on one's outlook. Modern marine ecosystems and marine reptiles legacy. Modern marine ecosystems continue to be shaped by the events of the past, including the extinction of marine reptiles. The absence of large marine reptiles in modern oceans meant that other predators had to evolve to fill those roles. The result is a modern ocean ecosystem dominated by sharks, rays, cetaceans, fish, and other creatures that would not exist in their current forms if marine reptiles had not gone extinct. Modern large predatory fish like great white sharks and mako sharks occupy ecological roles similar to those occupied by mosasaurs in the Cretaceous. Large cetaceans like sperm whales and orcas occupy roles similar to those occupied by large plesiosaurs and pliosaurs. Small dolphins occupy roles similar to those occupied by smaller ichthyosaurs and mosasaurs. The fact that different creatures can occupy similar ecological roles and develop similar morphological adaptations is one of the most profound insights of evolutionary biology, exemplified by marine reptile to cetacean succession. This process, called ecological replacement or ecological succession, occurs whenever extinction opens ecological roles that other organisms can fill. Modern research and future discoveries, our understanding of marine reptiles continues to develop as paleontologists make new discoveries and apply new technologies. Recent years have seen significant advances. New fossil discoveries continue to fill gaps in our understanding. The discovery of the first mosasaur fossils with stomach contents provided direct evidence of what these creatures ate. The discovery of ichthyosaur fossils with preserved embryos proved viviparity. Future discoveries will undoubtedly provide more detailed understanding of marine reptile biology and ecology. new technologies continue to provide new insights. Advanced CT scanning and analysis of three-dimensional fossil structure revealed details about brain anatomy, sensory capabilities, and internal physiology. Biomechanical modeling allows paleontologists to simulate how marine reptiles moved and hunted. Genetic analysis of preserved tissues, in rare cases where DNA or proteins are preserved, has provided information about relationships between marine reptile groups. Ongoing research into Cretaceous and Paleogene rocks is gradually refining our understanding of how quickly marine ecosystems recovered after the KPG extinction and what role marine reptile extinction played in the subsequent evolution of marine life. Philosophical reflections on extinction and change, the rise and fall of marine reptiles, raises profound questions about the nature of life on Earth, about extinction, and about change. For over 150 million years, longer than the entire existence of hominins, these creatures dominated the oceans. They evolved incredible diversity, colonized every marine ecosystem, achieved extraordinary sizes, and developed hunting strategies of remarkable sophistication. And then, in what is geologically an instant, they were gone. The last Mosasaur died, the last Plesiosaur perished, the last surviving marine reptile took its final breath. Within a few million years, the oceans that had been ruled by reptiles came to be ruled by mammals. The ecological roles these creatures had filled were occupied by different creatures, adapted through similar selective pressures to similar ecological conditions. This is the essential lesson of marine reptile history. Life on Earth is not static. Species arise, diversify, specialize, and eventually go extinct. Ecological roles persist, but the creatures filling them change. The biosphere is in constant flux, shaped by evolution, competition, and environmental change. In the modern world, faced with anthropogenic climate change, ocean acidification, and other environmental stresses caused by human activity, the history of marine reptiles provides both a cautionary tale and a perspective. The cautionary tale is that even extraordinarily successful, dominant organisms are vulnerable to environmental change. The perspective is that life on Earth, while vulnerable, has also proven remarkably resilient. The extinction of marine reptiles, while tragic from the perspective of those creatures, opened ecological space for the evolution of cetaceans and other marine mammals that would eventually exceed marine reptiles in size, intelligence, and ecological impact. Conclusion: the legacy of ancient seas. As we conclude our exploration of the rise and fall of marine reptiles, we return to where we began, with recognition of the extraordinary nature of these creatures and the significance of their history. For over 150 million years, marine reptiles were the dominant large animals in the world's oceans. They achieved sizes that would not be exceeded by any other marine predators until whales evolved. They developed body plans and hunting strategies of remarkable diversity and specialization. They shaped marine ecosystems through predation and competition. They dominated the ecological landscape of their time. Yet their dominance was not permanent. Specialization became a liability when environmental conditions changed. Competition from new predators, the Mosasaurs, gradually displaced older marine reptile lineages. The asteroid impact at the end of the Cretaceous delivered the final blow to the surviving populations. The extinction of marine reptiles teaches us about the impermanence of ecological dominance, the power of evolution to adapt organisms to new environments and ecological roles, and the vulnerability of even the most successful lineages to environmental change. Teaches us about the interconnectedness of ecosystems, how the decline of prey affects predators, how the evolution of new competitors affects established species, how environmental changes cascade through food webs and ecological communities. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches us humility. The creatures that once ruled the oceans are now known only through fossils, through fragments of bone preserved in stone. We can infer their lives, speculate about their behavior, marvel at their adaptations. But we can never truly know them, never see them living and hunting and surviving in their element. They are forever alien, forever distant, separated from us by millions of years and the extinction event that ended their reign. Yet in studying them, in piecing together the evidence of their existence, in understanding their successes and their failures, we gain insight not just into these particular creatures, but into the broader patterns of evolution and ecology that have shaped life on Earth. We gain perspective on the present moment, on the ecosystems that exist today, and that may be as vulnerable to change as the marine ecosystems of the Cretaceous were. The story of marine reptiles is not a story of inevitable progress toward modern forms. It is not a story of evolution moving purposefully toward the existence of humans or whales or any modern creature. It is instead a story of adaptation to available environmental conditions, of the evolution of remarkable diversity in response to ecological opportunities, of the vulnerability of even dominant creatures to environmental change. This is the story of the rise and fall of marine reptiles, a saga spanning over 150 million years, encompassing countless species, ecological interactions, and evolutionary innovations, ending in extinction but leaving a legacy that continues to inform our understanding of how life on Earth evolves, survives, and ultimately changes. In the ancient seas, creatures of extraordinary power and diversity ruled. Now those seas are ruled by different creatures, evolved to fill similar ecological roles but descended from different ancestors. And the story continues, as it always has, as organisms adapt and evolve in response to environmental change, as new species emerge and old species fade away, as the biosphere continues its endless transformation.